What's up, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, and the overall markets. I want to talk about why the market saw this very nice pump that started things off as we got very close to all-time highs. But once we hit this level, we got this massive rejection because of a big piece of news. Let me first say that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $2,000, you're guaranteed 30 in total. And the offer ends very soon at the end of March. So what's going on? Why did the market end up doing this? Well, the first thing that happened was the market got some good news. Apple did well with earnings, and then we got some good inflationary numbers. Our PCE data was all aligned with expectations, and the market started pushing. There was also a rumor that came out that Donald Trump's tariffs were not going to be imposed starting February. And then that is what led the market to just pushing very nicely, at least to start things off. But then as time went on, our press secretary came out and she said that actually she spoke with Trump, and starting on February 1st, Trump is going to be imposing tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China. And as soon as that news came out and Trump started talking about these tariffs, we saw this massive sell-off. And unfortunately, it looks like the market is starting to reverse. We're going to be watching this 600 support on SPY to see if this holds. If it doesn't, there's going to be a risk of even more downside. So please keep that in mind. If you look at the QQQ, same thing. It's looking a little weak right now. We'll see if it gets some kind of rebound first before it may continue to dip, but there is weakness that's building on the QQQ. The Russell got a rejection. Nvda got this big rejection. It was trying to break out only to come right back down. And then Tesla did the same thing. Unfortunately, Tesla ended up returning back down to where this trend line happens to be. We're just barely holding this, and we'll see if Tesla could hold it or not. But you guys can see the whole market basically did this. So in my video yesterday, I was saying there's going to be a pump coming. We did get the pump, though. We did see SPY run to almost 610 a share. The pump did come. It just did not last because of this new piece of news. I want to mention that the market saw a lot of red. We pumped very nicely and then got a huge rejection. Even Apple did the same thing amidst this news. So the question is, what's happening with these tariffs? What is Trump talking about? Is it worth it? I'll give you guys some information about this. Donald Trump came out and he is imposing 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico and a 10% tariff on China starting on Saturday. This is going to be very important because it's going to have a big effect on U.S. consumers and factors just like this. But the question is, what will this lead to? Is this worth it for the U.S.? What are my thoughts on this? I want to give you guys some information about this. Looking at some findings, research that's come out from the U.S. Tax Foundation claims that this is going to have a negative effect on the short term for our GDP. It's going to shrink our economic output to some extent just for the short term, but it's going to grow governmental revenue, which could try to offset that. So we'll be watching to see if that's worth it. I'll give you guys more information about that. UF tariffs could have short-term pain, according to some sources. Even Donald Trump said this. Donald Trump said that tariffs may cause a short-term disruption, and Elon Musk said the same thing as well. There could be some short-term pain for consumers amidst these tariffs coming out. But for the long term, Musk and Trump think it's going to be much worth it, and it's going to lead to a lot of growth in the US, at least for the longer term. So let's talk about what on earth is going on here. We have some nice charts on this source right here. This is from a very important source that's going to give us information about not only tariffs, but the effects of them. This is from the Council of Foreign Relations. So these sources are showing us right over here that Canada, Mexico, and China make up nearly half of the U.S. trade. They're very important for our GDP and factors just like that. And then on top of this, there's a lot of imports that are impacted by this. A lot of these imports include like cars, crude petroleum, phones, computers, motor parts, and other factors like that. These products are heavily affected by China, Mexico, and Canada. So it's very important to remember that, especially as the U.S. gets lots of crude from Canada. This is going to raise production costs for the U.S. and different automakers, at least to some extent. And then this may also impact groceries to some extent, especially as Mexico is the biggest source of fresh produce, supplied more than 60% of the U.S.'s vegetable imports and nearly half of all fruit and nut imports. So just keep that in mind, guys. The U.S. does depend a lot on Mexico when it comes to things like that. However, despite that, the U.S. is actually, and I want to put it out there that the U.S. is not as reliant as other countries are on trade relative to their peers. It's because the U.S. is so massive. The U.S. has such a huge GDP that, even though, we get hundreds of billions of dollars worth of imports every single year, for a country like Germany, for Japan, and these other countries that have smaller GDPs, that's going to be worth so much more. For the US, it's such a massive market. That's why it makes up a smaller percentage of the amount of imports. So if you look at compared to like Germany, compared to the UK, compared to Japan, the US is actually less reliant on trade than its peers. So keep that in mind. That's a small difference right over there. How would these tariffs affect Canada and Mexico? As you guys can see, they are very dependent on the US when it comes to trade. Keep that in mind. Coming down here, Canada and Mexico are far more dependent on the US than vice versa. You can see that this research right here suggests that we essentially have 78% of exports to the US from Canada. So they really depend on the US. And then Mexico also depends a lot on the US. Their exports to the US are at 80%. They depend a lot on the US. So it's going to be very impactful for them. For China, on the other hand, what's interesting about China is when you go down here, their exports to the US are smaller because they export a lot to the rest of the world, but the US is still a major partner. So you want to keep that in mind. Yes, maybe China's a little bit less dependent on the US than like Mexico and Canada, but they still are a very, very big partner. So what's going to happen, at least moving forward, this is going to be affecting a lot of different resources. It's going to affect U.S. goods. Don't forget the U.S. depends on these countries for like yogurts, for steel, for pork, for tablecloths, a bunch of different things like that. Also aluminum and steel, and the list goes on. So keep all of that in mind. So we're very dependent on the very, very easygoing tariffs that have helped the US maintain lower prices, but now things are going to be changing as the world is getting ready for a lot of changes. So what are the pros and cons of this? What do I think this is going to lead to? So we have a 25% tariff on Mexico and Canada and 10% on China. So what's not so good is many different sources suggest that this is going to have a negative effect on GDP for the short term. Remember, it's just for the short term. This will be a little negative. This could cause GDP to go down by 0.4 to about 1%, depending on different factors that I've been looking at. So keep that in mind. It's just a short-term thing that's going to be happening. There might be some pain to our GDP because these countries make up a very, very big percentage of our trade. Then higher inflation could be coming for the short term because when you think about it, because we're dependent on these countries and because they help us in a lot of different ways, prices will go up with these tariffs. It's going to be affecting consumers, of course. And then it also depends on what they end up doing in return because if the US is increasing tariffs on Mexico, Canada, China, will they increase tariffs back on us? And that could lead to a little bit more costs, right? But even if they don't do that, cost will most likely still go up to a larger extent. So keep that in mind just for the short term. For the short term, there could be higher inflation. Other countries could also increase tariffs back on the US. This could also hurt businesses to some extent because of the fact that it's going to add to a lot more expenditures. And this could cause them to want to manufacture more in the US or try to sway away from these countries to some extent. Simultaneously, this could lead to maybe some bankruptcies. We'll see about that depending on what they end up doing. And this could hurt some margins. This could cause costs to go up, especially in the automotive industry. So for the short term, there could be a little bit of pain for US businesses and also these other businesses that trade with the US. Okay, so those are like the cons, at least thus far. But the question is, are they worth it? Is it worth the good that's going to come to let this happen? What's good about this is that we're going to increase governmental revenue through this. So the US government's going to collect these tariffs, make hundreds of billions of dollars more. And you could argue that they could use that to pay off some of their debt. They could help decrease taxes, do all kinds of things like that. Now, can the US government, use this revenue? Whether it's, I saw some estimates say maybe close to like 400 billion, but that depends on different factors. So if like China, Mexico, and Canada, if they don't increase tariffs on us, we can make like $400 billion in extra revenue, but it could go down. It could go down a little bit if these countries start increasing tariffs back at us. So it all depends on what they end up doing as well. That's going to be very important to remember. But let's just say we do end up getting like $400 billion, whatever, something like that. These numbers could change depending on some factors. If we get extra amounts of revenue, the government could use that to invest in the US, improve infrastructure, help create more jobs. They could also use that to help farmers out. They could do a lot of things with that money simultaneously, right? So is it worth it? It depends on the extent. It depends on all these different factors. I can't really give you a definite answer about that. That's up to you to decide. Millions of Americans think it's worth it, that ultimately this is going to lead to a lot more fairness, and it's going to be used as a negotiation tactic to get other countries to do what we want them to do. If Trump continues to, threaten higher tariffs unless this country does so and so, that could be used as a negotiation tactic, for example. So that's something else that could be used. So there are some benefits, but the question is it worth it? And that's something I cannot truly answer because millions of Americans think it's worth it. It's going to help bring in more revenue for the government. This could help create more jobs. This could help decrease taxes on the individuals. And many people would really, really like that. But simultaneously, you could argue that we don't know the full extent of that, and that the short-term cons, the short-term negative effects to GDP, the short-term effects that this is going to have on inflation going up is not worth it. So some people would argue it's not worth it. Some people think it's worth it. That's up to you guys to decide. But you guys can now kind of weigh in these options. This is a very simplified version of what's going on, and we'll see how this ends up going. So I'm going to wait many, many months. For the short term, I'm referring to maybe the next 6 or so months. There's going to be more pain coming. I do believe prices will go up, but is it worth it? We'll have to wait and see. The stock market knows that these tariffs will have somewhat of a negative effect on GDP for the short term and prices and US businesses just for the short term. Is it worth it? We'll see. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We'll see. But I'm just here to tell you that that's why the market is selling off, because it knows how this is going to affect things. This could have a big effect on the Fed's policies if we get another surge in inflation. So please keep that in mind. Once again, guys, we'll see if it's worth it. I'm just here to give you guys the facts and let you guys know what you should know, and then you guys could determine if it's worth it or not. Many argue that there's lots of trade deficits in the US when we trade with other countries, and that some people think it's like a necessity that we have higher tariffs. Other people argue the exact opposite. That's up to you to decide. I'm just here to give you the facts once again. So, what do I see for the market moving forward? Just know that for Monday, we have the ISM manufacturing numbers coming out. On Tuesday, we have the JOLTS job openings and job quits reports to some jobs numbers. On Wednesday, we have very minor data. We have the PMI reports. The ISM services will be a little bit more serious, and I think we have like a bunch of Fed speakers later on. On Thursday, we have non-farm payrolls, which is a little bit more minor. And then Friday is going to be very serious since we have the unemployment numbers. Unemployment is going to be very pivotal during times like this. So we'll see what happens with those numbers. But just keep in mind, guys, this is going to be very important. So we'll see how this affects things. Also, I want to add that when it comes to other factors, for earnings, okay, on Monday, we have Palantir announcing earnings. On Tuesday, we have PayPal and a few more, not to mention AMD, Alphabet, and Snap. On Wednesday, we have Uber, Disney, and then Ford. And then for Thursday, we have Amazon announcing earnings. So Tuesday and Thursday will be the two biggest days as we have lots of big tech earnings from Alphabet to Amazon, and get ready for some high volatility. So for the short term, the market's dipping quite a bit, but SPY has not lost its 20 EMA yet at 598.96. I think what's going to happen is we're going to dip a little bit more to test this, and we have to see if we get a temporary bounce from here or not. So watch for a small dip here. If we bounce off this, we could attempt a small rebound first, and then we'll see if we get another rejection or not to start dipping lower. Or if we don't get the bounce, we could just continue to fall straight down to like 595. So it depends on if we get a small bounce or not. But overall, this is looking like a market structure change. The reason I'm saying this is because as far as the market's going, every time historically we've hit 608 to 610 on SPY, we've rejected. So this is a sign that there could be a rejection coming for a multi-day downtrend. I think that we dip a bit more to about 598.96 to near the 20 EMA, and we'll see if the buyers defend this, try to push this back up temporarily for a little rebound. And then we'll see if we get a rejection again to make a lower high to start dipping to 595. If we don't get a bounce from 598, we could just dump straight down towards like the mid 590s. So we'll see if we bounce or not. But look for a little bit more downside to start things off, and we'll see if we get a bounce. I'm hoping we get a little bounce first before we see a continuation lower, possibly. That's the most likely case I'm going to be looking at. For the QQQ, it's the same thing essentially. We are dipping here. We're watching to see if 520 holds. If it holds, this could attempt a little rebound back up to 525. If it doesn't hold, we could be dumping to about 515 before we see a small bounce again. So we'll see. Watch for a test of about 520. We'll see if we bounce. If not, we dip to about 515. Then we'll see what the reaction happens to be. For the Russell 2000, there are some gaps to fill below. We have to see if 225 holds. If not, we could be dipping back down towards 222. So please be very careful as we have a double top here. We have resistance at 228, and we could be dipping a little bit lower just to give this some time. For ES, we basically are making lower highs right here. We have 6125 as our resistance. We have support at 6050 and 6023. I believe what's going to happen is ES dumps to about 6023 to 6050 in this range here. There might be a little rebound off our EMAs before we try to go a little bit lower like this. That could be what the move is about to be. But it depends if we get a bounce here or not. So we'll see how it ends up reacting. As of right now, every time we've hit this resistance zone between 6125 and 6160, we tend to reject historically. So there's going to be a risk of us doing something like this. Might dip a little bit more towards these EMAs at 6020 to 6040, and then we'll see if we get a bounce. So I anticipate some downside, and we'll see if buyers return or not. Same thing with NQ. So NQ pumped very nicely to fill its gap at 22,000. Then we got a massive rejection. We have to see if we could try to hold above 21,500. If we hold this, we could attempt a rebound like this and just consolidate in this range. If we don't hold 21,500, if we kind of like bounce and reject, we're going to be at risk of returning back down to the lower 21,000s. So just be very careful, guys, depending on how things end up going. Bitcoin, it's going to be testing 101,900, could rebound a bit before it dips. We're stuck between 101 and 106,000 going back and forth. There is a risk of us dipping back down to 98,800 if this ends up failing, so watch that very closely and give this the time it needs. I think it just consolidates, by the way. Nvidia is showing a little bit of weakness after this news about tariffs. It might revisit 117. We were trying to bounce here. We got a rejection against, not the best of signs. This might be dipping closer to about 117, so please keep that in mind. For Tesla has this resistance trend line. We were not able to hold above this on the daily, but we're going to be watching to see how it reacts. We have a wick that formed here. I think it's still holding above 400 quite nicely, so it might attempt to retest 410 or so, but the question is, can we hold above this trend line? We're just barely holding this on the 4 hour. If you draw it out on the 4 hour time frame, we're barely there. So there might be a little rebound coming to Tesla like this before it continues to dip a little bit lower. I think it might be dipping back down into this range before we see some buyers defend it again. So we're still in a range on Tesla. There might be a small dip coming here because of this news. We'll see if this trend line holds, but I think what's going to happen is we rebound a bit, then we start dipping a bit towards the 390s again before we see some buyers try to defend it as well. For Aapl, we pumped and rejected, so we're watching to see if we could hold support at 234. That's going to be a big area of support. We could rebound here, and we'll see if we get a rejection back down or not. There's still the inverse head and shoulders setup, so we'll see if we get a bounce or not, but I do see a risk of us kind of rebounding into like the 237 area before it starts to slow down, so just keep that in mind. That's going to be very key for the way we end up continuing to move. I'm just going to go over a couple of these. I'll go over AMD, then I'll talk about the rest of these, but be kind of brief. We have a gap to fill down here on AMD. I was trying to bounce and got a rejection. I think it could be dipping back down to 114. I think it's going to be a small dip coming all the way back down to these lows around 114 to 113, so keep that in mind. Coin is rejecting here. It could be returning to about 287. This could lead to a little bit more downside back down towards these levels, so keep that in mind. Amazon might be retesting 236. If that fails us, we could be dipping back down towards 233. If it holds, we could attempt a rebound, but look for a little bit more downside. Meta could be dipping back down to about 676. This might be a little bit more bearish for now before we see some buyers try to defend it. Microsoft is looking a little weaker. We have to see if 412 holds. If not, we could be dipping to about 410 or below, so keep that in mind. And then Google, of all things, is showing resilience because it's been holding above 200 at least quite nicely. Might return to 202. We have a gap to fill down to 202, so it might dip towards that gap fill. Then we'll see if we get a bounce off 202. So look for a test of 202 to 200 on Google before we see some buyers defend it. Overall, it looks like the market might dip a little bit more, but we'll see if buyers defend once we get to our first round of support, right? SPY has not lost 600 yet at the time of recording this, so it could be returning to like 598, which is where we have some key support. So we'll see how things end up going. With that being said, guys, I am very conscious that I didn't go over every factor involving tariffs. I went over a lot of important things, but not every single thing. So just keep in mind that this is just like some of the factors that will affect everyday consumers and the US. So I wish you all the best, at least moving forward, and we'll see how things end up going. Let's see if Trump officially imposes these tariffs tomorrow or not. If he does, keep your heads up because it's not the end of the world. We're going to survive, guys. We'll be okay. Just know that there are going to be some costs that have to be weighed in, and we'll see how it goes. Nonetheless, I wish the best for all Americans. I wish the best for our peers, our trade partners, and etc. And I just hope that we continue to make deals as time goes on and we all continue to flourish. I wish you all the best moving forward, guys. Get ready for a big policy change that could be coming. And as far as the market goes, there's a risk of a bit more downside, and we'll see how we end up reacting as time goes on. I thank you for listening. Have a good one, guys, and peace out.